Damn dog, it's about time I got off my ass and reviewed a Master System game. Out of all the consoles I've amassed over the years, perhaps the most neglected is this poor bastard right here from Sega. And while I grew up with the Nintendo Entertainment System, or the NES for those that are cool, the Master System was an anomaly to me, and to this very day, it still kinda is, despite there being one like 10 feet from me right now. I did have a chance to play it a few times when it was as relevant as it could be in the United States. My friend Brian had one, but I only went to his house once, and I legit had no idea what it was when we played it. I didn't even know what a Sega was at that time. That being said though, the game still didn't draw me in like the NES did, despite them looking generally better. I'm pretty sure though, unless my memories betray me, he had some crap at his place, like some shitty sports games. And I mean, if you've ever gazed upon me, you'll know that I'm not man enough to like sports. So yeah, I wasn't completely won over by the machine. Now let's fast forward 100 years into the future to right now. There was only a handful of games for the Sega Master System that I actually considered doing a review video for, and quite frankly, I'm glad that I chose Golden Axe Warrior to do a deep dive into. Now, I'm not going to give you my verdict quite yet on what I think about this game, but this one that was released later on in the console's life does have enough substance to actually warrant this video being made. That being said though, let's get into this. Whatever the fuck this is. Golden Axe Warrior, which I'll just refer to as Warrior from now on because I don't want to keep saying Golden Axe Warrior. I could just call it GAW, but I don't like that, so I'm just going to call it Warrior. Now, it was released in 1991, and the box art promised to make you jizz uncontrollably while humping a pillow for hours, straight up, while your parents went out to the bar and got hammered, smoked a pack of cigarettes, and then drove home. I mean, just look at that box art. It's insane. You know what you were up to when your parents left you alone, you freak. This came out in the 90s. You didn't have the internet. You were horny and you were angry. Admit it. Anyway, this came out long after any other company would have dropped the poor old Master System off on the church steps in a basket, as the 16-bit Genesis or Mega Drive outside the US was already out for years and going strong. But the Master System was still staying afloat in some parts of the world. In fact, it was thriving in South America and doing very well in Europe. So Sega figured, what the hell, let's copy Zelda. Now, I appreciate that Warrior doesn't try to hide what inspired it, and that's fine. Nintendo has a knack for creating or refining entire genres everyone wants a piece of, and Sega wasn't the only one trying to get their grubby little hands on that piece of pie. Remember when I reviewed both Neutopia 1 and 2 on the TurboGrafx-16/PC engine? Now, I've got the PC engine, which is the Japan variant. I love the way it looks compared to the American TurboGrafx, but they're the same machine regardless. Both of these games wanted to be Zelda hard as hell, and that first Neutopia video is probably what single-handedly made the YouTube algorithm decide to blacklist my channel forever.
You wanna get f***ed by a game, dude? Go buy yourself a Legend of Zelda copy. F***ing have sex with that cartridge, man. Put your f***ing dick in it. It's got battery backup. It'll remember what you did.
Obviously, I will post links in the description below if you want to be one of the few to check those out, but be warned, they're old and rough, kind of like me. They're some of the first videos I've made. Anyway, the takeaway here is that Zelda rules and things want to be that. Neutopia beat Warrior to the punch by about 2 years, but in my opinion, Warrior is better. That's your history lesson for today. Let's talk about this game now, for God's sakes. Let's start first with the story. The devs really tried to make this story matter, and it has something to do with a king and 9 crystals and the main Golden Axe baddie, Death Adder, getting them from behind the king's back and taking over the world. That's all you need to know, as it's very basic, but the intro scroll seems to go on forever. By this point, I have to assume Sega was aware that putting the pause button on the Master System console instead of on the controller was the stupidest shit they've ever done, and fired whoever had that bright idea. So because of that massive up, what we do here is relegate the menu screen to the 1 button and the action to the 2 button. That's as insane as things ever get here. But when the action gets nuts, which it will, expect to be pulling up the item menu accidentally perhaps 1,000 times while you're pounding on the controller during your 9 or 10 hours of play while attempting to beat this one. I did this so many times it transcends from absurdity into hilarity. It does help though that you can use your Genesis or Mega Drive controller for this one, so you don't have to deal with the shitty Master System one, and I strongly urge you to use a non-Master System controller every chance you get because it sucks. So as you can see, the action takes place on an overhead map, very similar to Zelda, and by very similar, I mean exactly. And that will be the last time I make this comparison because believe me, every single aspect of this game is comparable to Zelda, so there isn't much of a point to me constantly bringing it up and shoving it in your face. Let it be known, this game is a blatant ripoff of that one. Yes, we all get it, you can see it with your eyes. So let's talk about the merit this one has. First off, it looks better. The graphics here are great. I mean, at least for their time. But in my opinion, this is still pleasing to the eye even to this day. Sure, it won't blast process your girlfriend's pussy off these days, but it looks good and it's nice and colorful, something the Master System is great at. The world map is fairly large. I can't remember how big the map is on the other game. I think it's like 15 by 8, but I don't know, I'm not looking it up, and I swore I wouldn't mention that game again, but I know this one is a 15 by 15 grid, which is pretty huge, along with the 10 dungeons, or labyrinths, as they are referred to in this game, and it's easy to wander around and get lost for large swaths of time. In fact, I suggest while playing this, you have a map downloaded to your phone or PC and pulled up at all times, along with a walkthrough on GameFAQs, unless you want to spend way more hours playing this one than necessary. Every part of the overworld grid is its own isolated, non-scrolling screen, and you can usually travel north, south, west, or east, kind of like that other game. At first, you'll be exploring around killing enemies that are very similar to, alright man, Zelda. And yes, I'm gonna keep bringing it up. I didn't want to, but it's impossible because this game straight up ripped that one off. And not making comparisons is a fool's errand because everyone knows that game and it makes sense to use it as a frame of reference. But let it be known, Warrior does stand on its own despite being the rejected love child of Zelda for the NES. So you wander around the map and there are things you can find like armor upgrades, shield upgrades, weapon upgrades, and my very favorite, people that just steal your money. I wasn't going to bring it up because I didn't feel like finding clips for it, but yeah, there's people that do that in the OG Zelda 2. And yeah, I didn't even show the clip because I got shit to do, man. Usually when I mention something, I show the clip. I'm not doing that today. You can also find magic like fire, earth, water, and lightning magic, and you find these in scrolls, and when you get all of them, I guess you summon Captain Planet. Yeah, I know that joke didn't land. Moving on. Weirdly enough, I never found the fire magic, even though I guess I was supposed to find that first. I did just fine without it. What you will not do fine without, though, is earth and water magic, as earth magic destroys boulders and other obstructions, so you can find hidden passages and warp points, or open doors in dungeons, and water magic restores health at the cost of a lot of magic points. You can also find weapon upgrades throughout the game. You'll start with a sword that's embarrassing trash you wouldn't want to be caught dead with. Then you'll find an axe, which is still shit but stronger and allows you to chop down trees and other shrubbery found across the map, though it has a shorter reach but it can hit at angles, which, that's what she said, right? Then you upgrade your sword more, then you find the golden axe, which didn't blow me away, but it's the strongest weapon in the game. What's really great about the golden axe is that you get it right before you beat the game, so that's great. JK, that sucks. And it's super hard to get because the last dungeon is a piece of shit. I mean, labyrinth, whatever. You can also upgrade your shield just like in Zelda, and it blocks things better. Who would have thought? As you explore the map, and as a reward for doing so, you will find random strangers and other hidden crap by swinging away at shrubbery with the axe or by using earth magic to destroy boulders, as I already mentioned. And this can find hidden stairs and lead to other goodies like new magic spells or more health. Also, as you beat the dungeons, labyrinths, you will also gain 1 extra heart of health, just like Zelda. Unlike Zelda, you can also get more magic. Speaking of labyrinths, there are 10 to be found within the game. I believe the first 6 or 7 you can go to if you just happen across them. Some might be difficult to beat though, as you might want certain items like a torch to light them in order to progress, but they aren't absolutely necessary. Every labyrinth has an exclusive item in it, like a thief key to unlock any door, weapon upgrades, speed shoes that do exactly what you think they do, a canoe to travel across small streams, and a sailboat to travel across oceans, an ice bell that reveals secrets on the screen you're on, a hookshot to find hidden screens on the overworld map, and my very favorite, the hot air balloon that shows you a very detailed and yet very distant, impossible to interpret picture of the map. To add to the fun, it takes like 10 minutes to load the entire picture, so it's incredibly useful. I'm joking, the hot air balloon sucks. Whoever decided to put this in the game is a fucking idiot. Let's talk about what games were like in the 80s and 90s real quick, in case you forgot. So, I mentioned you get the hook shot. There's absolutely no indication 90% of the time where you can use this on the map. You just have to hump every inch of land to see if it takes. That's why I suggest having a map pulled up on your phone or PC so you can see where you can use this thing. What it does is pulls you up or down to isolated regions of the map that are otherwise inaccessible, but many of these are impossible to know that they are there without a guide, and even one or two of these regions contain items you need to progress through the game. The 80s and 90s were the worst when it comes to this obscure shit, and that's why I said to have the map and walkthrough pulled up so you don't have to deal with this nonsense. I'll throw another link below to the guide you should use, and there should be a picture up on the screen of the map you're looking for. You're welcome.
Did you mess with it? Did you come in it?
I know I already mentioned this, but now it's time to expound upon it. As you play through the game, you're going to run into enemies that look exactly like the same kind of shit you would find in Zelda. And I mean exactly. We're talking bats, fat pigs that shoot arrows at you, skeletons that throw swords. It's all here, man, and you can let it bother you that Sega could be this shameless or just embrace it. Sega has no shame, and it works here because they improved upon the formula. I'll be honest, this game is better than the original Zelda, and it better be because it came out years later, so Sega had time to rip it off and perfect it, and they did that, thank God. Speaking of enemies, there's a boss at the end of every labyrinth, and again, some of these might remind you of Zelda, like the dragons. Others are just guys that walk around and shit all over the floor. Others are just goo that spit spikes. I don't know, it doesn't really matter. They're whatever, and many of these can be cheesed with the thunder magic or by standing in the doorway and hacking away until they're dead. Take every advantage you can get because this game is hard as hell. Speaking of labyrinth bosses, let's talk about the labyrinths themselves really quick.
Did you come in my burrito?
I didn't come in your burrito! I wouldn't do that to you!
Some of them are straightforward and follow a linear path that leads you from point A to point B. Some of the later labyrinths, however, can be a convoluted mess to get through, with warp zones zipping you all over the place and needing to find hidden switches to open doors, etc. I assume Sega considered this the evolution of Zelda at the time, and perhaps it was, but I'll just reiterate again, keep a map and a guide open unless you want to waste a ton of your time, and look, you only live once. Time is precious, so don't waste it unless you have absolutely nothing else to do this entire week. Anyway, back to the bosses. Like I said, some of these, including Death Adder, the final boss, can be killed in the most embarrassing fashion by just standing in the doorway and swinging your weapon. The developers never anticipated you doing this, so you can wreck a few bosses by just not moving. It's easy, but it's earned since the last labyrinth is such pure garbage to get through. And that being said, let's talk about where this game excels and where it fails, then let's call it a day. Let's talk about how it fails first so we can end on a positive note. What this game does wrong first and foremost is what happens when you die. You restart at your last save point, which could either be a village or the start of a dungeon. But no matter how much maximum health and magic you've accumulated throughout your game, you start with just 3 health points and 3 magic points, which is paltry bullshit towards the latter half of the game. In fact, that's exactly what you begin the game with when you first start playing it. And I'll say grinding in this game isn't easy, such as in real life, unless you're these guys. I think this is how the game works. When you kill any enemies, they are gone for a time limit no matter how many times you die or revisit an area. It's a blessing sometimes when you're just trying to get back to an area and you don't want the resistance, especially in the early parts of the game. But when you die and you have 3 hearts and 3 magic and you want to grind to get that back up, when there are no enemies to kill, it's incredibly frustrating because you can't. Then you go back through a dungeon to the harder enemies or the boss that killed you before and you just get killed again because you don't have any health. It's a vicious cycle that is hard to break, and you could leave the labyrinth to go to a village to an inn, but here's the other problem. In order to stay at most inns, you gotta pay horns. Horns being the cheddar in this game, and every time you die, you lose a chunk of your horns. It's incredibly difficult to ever have more than like $20 of horns in this, so if you want to grind to stay at an inn, you gotta do it with minimal health, and if you're in the harder sections of the game, well, you see the conundrum here, don't you? It is insanely frustrating. This only becomes a problem toward the end of the game, but it is so unbalanced, and the game begins to disrespect your time harder than that Sounds of Silence cover by Disturbed. This whole cycle can drive you crazy. Needing health, needing to kill enemies hoping they drop health, but taking damage while you fight them, trying to get horns, etc. It's maddening. There's no real good way around it either, so your best bet is just leaving and going all the way across the map to a free inn if you know where one is, and then traveling all the way back to where you were, hoping you don't accumulate too much damage on your way there. This is the early 90s. Games don't care about you or your feelings, or your job, or your family. They want you to waste as much time as humanly possible playing them, and this game is straight up guilty of that. Another example of that is after you complete each labyrinth, you have to walk back out of it, room by room, with all the enemies still intact so you can take as much damage as possible to get back outside. With today's quality of life improvements, the game these days obviously would just warp you back to the front door, or at the very least be nice enough to ask if that's what you want. Not here though. Walk your fat ass back out and learn your lesson, asshole. There's no free rides here. And a fast travel system would have been nice, but that's a hard ask at this point, and I know that, but still, a man can dream. I'll also say that unlike Zelda, which I remember being more fair than this when it comes to hit detection, as sometimes it's impossible to not take damage in this game. Once you get to the final labyrinth, there are things flying all over the place, enemies shooting crap at you, spikes on the floor hitting you constantly. It's absurd. The final labyrinth is like 40 rooms, and it's like Squid Game trying to get through all of this garbage. I never saw Squid Game, but I assume that comparison is accurate. I legit had to resort to save states on my EverDrive, and I didn't want to do that, but it was the only way to finish this game in a reasonable amount of time without quitting my job I'll probably get fired from anyway. Now let's talk about what's good here, and despite all my gripes a second ago, there's a lot to like. As I said, this is better than the OG Zelda, and it better be, since this came out 5 years after that did, so Sega had a lot of time to get things right. And for the most part, they did. The graphics are better, the sound is comparable, the world map is bigger, and for the most part, it plays exactly the same. Like, exactly the same. As Master System games go, the polish is there. Sega took the time on this one, and it shows. The map is well planned. For instance, there are 2 different continents, and the second only opens up after you make enough progress, which was a relatively new idea at the time. Think of it as the precursor to the Dark World in Link to the Past. The map is also interesting to explore. There are tons of hidden rooms throughout, and the controls, for the most part, work well. I do find it's pretty easy to take damage at times, but it's usually fine. Only towards the end of the game are you going to start getting frustrated with this, and look, it's 2025 at the time of this video, so when it starts getting frustrating, just start cheating like I did. Look, Golden Axe Warrior is a fun but flawed game, but I enjoyed a majority of my time I spent playing through it. If you're a fan of the OG Zelda on the NES, there's no reason you wouldn't like this one too, but do yourself a favor, just go get a game fact guide and go download the map, use those. With those tools, you can probably power through this in just a day or two. 75% of this game, it's a really fun game. The other 25%, it's just a game, but it's definitely worth checking out. Thank you guys for watching this video. I'll see you on the next one.